So, hi and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from your lunch break. I hope you all enjoyed the lunch break so far, and you're also enjoying the event. So, yeah. So my name is Nadim. I'm a managing data scientist and sales director at the Thamm GmbH. And the reason why we all gathered together here now is to discuss and talk a little bit about this mysterious subject which is in every mouth today, the blockchain. A secret network, a hidden layer, the blockchain, everybody is talking about it. So probably not a lot of people know what the blockchain actually is. And so I brought the following gentleman with me today. So please welcome with me Marco, my colleague from the Thamm GmbH. He's a data scientist and project lead. Then I'm very happy to welcome Sebastian Heinz. He's the CEO and founder of Statworx. And I'm very happy to have Thomas Schmiedel today with me, data scientist of our befriended colleagues of Data Reply. So welcome, guys. Thank you for spending the time with me for the next around 35 to 40 minutes. And let's start straight away with the subject and discuss about this most popular subject at the moment in the tech world. So, Sebastian, tell me, what is the blockchain and what is the blockchain about? How does it work?
Thank you, Nadim. Also welcome from my side to everybody. Yeah, what is the blockchain? At the end of the day, it's not that complicated, actually. Just to get you started, it's just data at the end of the day, okay? So the blockchain, as the name states, is composed of different blocks of data. This is like the first thing you need to know. What's special about the blockchain is that those blocks of data are connected to each other in a way that the information that is stored within the blocks is connected to the blocks before, right? So let's take an example. Let's say you want to store some information, some transaction information you have into a block into the blockchain. Then this information gets stored into your block, and in order to secure it, a hash, so-called hash, is generated, which is a cryptographic key that encrypts your data within your block in the blockchain. And now comes the special part where the chain comes in, because the hash code that is relevant for your block in the blockchain will be tied to the block after your block in the blockchain, right? So every block depends on the block before within the blockchain. So for the first block in the blockchain, you don't have a block that comes before. This is the so-called Genesis block. And every block that is added after it depends on the block before. By depending, I mean the information that is encrypted and stored within your block depends on the hash that was generated in the block before, right? So it's just like a sequential information of data that is encrypted in a way that it depends on the encryption in the block before. And by doing so, it gets very, very difficult to manipulate information that is stored within your block, because if you change your information, your hash code changes within your block, and so is the hash code changing for every other block in the blockchain that comes after it, because all those blocks are tied together by the hash before, right? So if you wanted to like hack information in your block, you would have to hack the whole blockchain. Yeah, by manipulating the hash values that are stored within every block in the blockchain.
Okay, but this means the blockchain itself is, what would you say? Is it a layer? Is it, so people also talking about the so-called distributed ledger?
Yes.
So would you say it's a layer, it's a database? What is the blockchain?
I mean, actually it's just like a special form of, it's like a sequential database, right? Where every record in the database is connected to each other by the connection of the hash values of the different blocks.
Okay. But a lot of people also talk about, like, okay, we have the blockchain on the one hand side, so this is the technology with all the people talk about hash and encryption and stuff. Then we have distributed layer, means the ledger somehow, so it's kind of an online database. Yes. But what are then this subject of smart contracts? This is the third buzzword within the row of these three terms.
I mean, a smart contract is actually contractual information that is stored within the blockchain, right? Actually, you can store everything in it. It's just not. It's not focused on, for example, cryptocurrencies or contractual information. Actually, you can store everything within blocks in the blockchain, and it gets encrypted in a very, very secure way that it's almost impossible to alter at the end of the day. Yeah? When you're speaking of smart contracts are actually information, contractual information that is stored on the blockchain within different blocks. But, and now is the interesting part, those contractual information executes automatically, right? If certain contractual topics that have been coded into the contract are fulfilled, then, for example, the code is executed. Let me give you a short example for that. There's, for example, you want to fund a campaign on Kickstarter, right? And you want to give money to a project you're really interested in, and you think it's a cool product, and blah, blah, blah. So at the end of the day, what you do is you give your money to Kickstarter, and if the funding goal on Kickstarter is reached, then the money is passed forward to the actual project owners, right? So there's like a if condition that's programmed into the whole process. They say, okay, if the goal of funding is reached, then the money is transferred to the project owners. And this simple if equation could be completely included into a smart contract. Okay. You say, okay, if a specific amount of money is reached, then the money is automatically transferred to your contractual partner.
This means the information is stored in another block of within the blockchain.
Exactly.
And is distributed to
exactly right. This if condition is stored within a block in the blockchain. And what's also very interesting about it, it's even though it's very hard to manipulate, it's still visible to other people, right? Other people who are on the blockchain can actually see, if the blockchain is programmed like that, can see the contractual information, but it's still very secure and almost not to manipulate.
And this actually brings us to another question. So far, this means we have the security aspect, we have the transparency, but maybe Marco, what else? What are advantages or benefits by using the blockchain? What would you say? So, especially when it comes to smart contracts.
So basically, the main advantages come from the perks that you get in the blockchain. So basically, the blockchain is designed in a way that it's virtually impossible to add, remove, or change any data without the network getting notice of it. So when it comes to the three main perks I like the most, it's transparent, so you can check the transaction inside the network. I can verify that party A transferred something to party B. It's also decentralized, so today transactions are verified by central authorities like government or banks or whatever central authority. And now we are able to change the way we are thinking. Like we don't need a central authority to verify any transaction. It can be literally done by 1,000 computers on a network. So when I send you money, for example, if we use the use case of money, like peer-to-peer transactions, the network can verify that I sent you money and then that I have the money to send you actually. And when it comes to immutability, so it can be changed, the thing is that offers a lot of possibilities to us, because you can't go back in history and change the transaction, because like Basti said, it's a cryptographic hash, and when you change the data inside of it, the hash is different and the linking from the block in previous.
Okay, but let's stick to this point for a second. So imagine there are business models, or they used to be maybe also transaction in government, I don't know, where you had to, or where people tried to manipulate historical records. So what happens in the blockchain if you would try?
Yes. So basically, if you try to alter a block which stores any kind of information, let's go with an example. We can like land titles. So I own a piece of land in a country, and if you try to alter that information in the blockchain, it is first. If you put the block into the blockchain, it's calculated by the hash. So there's a certain string or hash which is linking from block to block, and when you change the information inside, the hash is completely different. So the block is no longer linking to its parent, and that's when you can see there has been the chain has been altered and it's invalid then.
And what would happen then? So
the network would reject it basically.
Okay.
So you would have to compute a chain of consecutive valid blocks, and by the end you have to compute the longest chain to overtake a network, which would basically be a 51% attack in such a blockchain network.
Okay. Yeah. And what about then if somebody would like to change it, just hypothetically, is this possible, or would it be efficient? Or
it is possible in theory. If we take a very big network, you would need 51% of the computation power to add block after block after block, so that at the end you have the longest chain, and then the network thinks, okay, you're the one with the correct chain, and everybody on the network takes this chain, and then you could successfully change the blockchain, but it's very computation intensive.
I think another layer of security besides this linking of the blocks, it's also the so-called proof of work, right? Mm-hmm. Because the thing is, nowadays computers are so fast that they could theoretically generate, let's say, infinite hash values, right? Let's say we have a blockchain of 100,000 blocks entities, then it would be actually no problem to compute all the hashes at the same time, right? It's just a click on your computer. But the thing is, if you want to change or add information to the blockchain, you have to compute a so-called proof of work, which is a very, very complicated mathematical operation, which takes on average about 10 minutes to complete. So let's say in our scenario where we have a blockchain of 100,000 blocks, we would have compute 100,000 proof of works.
Okay.
Which means 100,000 times 100, which is a very, very long time. And also the entities in the blockchain would have to have consensus about the altered information, which means that the entities in the blockchain have to agree on changing or adding the manipulated data into the block.
So would you say then that it's not possible, more or less, actually, by the end of the day to...
That's at least what I've read.
Maybe if we just take our heads up for a second, and now we discussed the technical part of the blockchain. When we look into the industries today, and when we think about industries which could use this technology, Thomas, which industries do you see where blockchain has a potential and where blockchain is maybe also available today or is used?
Okay, so the first thing one needs to think about is when to actually you need a blockchain for this. So there are some similarities between databases and blockchains, for example. The smart contracts we've been talking about, they could correspond basically to stored procedures on a database. So basically you store things and you have some code that handles the data stored inside. And the smart contract does this for the blockchain. And now the question is, how is the blockchain different from the database? So there are two main aspects that I see here. One aspect is, of course, that it's distributed and decentralized. And this relates to trust, because you cannot trust, even though it's like a secure company and so on, or a secure website and so on, you cannot trust like a single entity. But you can trust a whole network basically taking care of the data that you want to handle basically. So the trust thing is very important. So trust. If you need trust, this is like a pro for blockchains. The other thing is availability. So you cannot take down a blockchain. You can basically, but if it's large, then you don't stand a chance basically. So, and if we have like the availability thing and the trust thing, then anything that handles like, well, privacy relevant or transactions in general, because for example, telecommunications, insurance, banking, automotive, anything that needs to communicate internally can benefit from a blockchain, but also externally. Because here's the trust component. If you have companies like banks, maybe you know the London interbank offering rate, which several banks agree on which rate they lend to each other. And this is like a consensus voting done by humans. But when I'm a bank, for example, I would feel much better actually if there's some algorithm, some mathematical thing that guarantees actually that the decision that is made between the parties is secure and that everybody agrees on this. So like any communication, or think of GDPR for example, when companies need to communicate some data, then blockchains might be a reasonable thing. But also internal communication, transactions, insurance, for example.
But to make this more concrete, are there any, would you say, guys, that is there any industry? I mean, we see the example in banks, okay? Everybody's talking about cryptocurrency, everybody's talking about transactions from within the peer-to-peer network, but do you see a specific advantage for specific industries where crazy new business models or where crazy benefits can be derived from? So really, is the blockchain a game changer for any of these industries, or are we just talking about, yeah, we want to take out the intermediary and we try to avoid regulations and stuff? Because I think this is part of the discussion here when it comes to the industries, aren't they?
I would answer on this one that actually the blockchain is everywhere relevant. Where you have or let's say in terms of smart contracts, it's relevant everywhere where you have a contractual relationship to a third-party entity, which can be customers, which can be other companies, and so on. Because one of the main advantages of the smart contract is that it's coded, right? So, and everything that you code can be automated theoretically, right? Let's say that we have a contractual relationship. You offer me something and I want to buy it, but only when a certain condition is fulfilled, for example. Yeah? Then you could code it and you could execute it automatically. And this is also a really interesting thing when I think about the combination of the blockchain technology with stuff that's going on in machine learning and AI, because everything that you code can be automated, and automated decisions are the thing of machine learning actually. So the integration of automated rules that lead to the execution of contracts is a topic I think that's very relevant for every company, because every company has somehow a relationship to other entities within the system itself, within the economy, within customers or whatever, right? So the potential is really big, but what's very difficult for most companies is to really grasp the technology and to understand what it's all about. But at the end of the day, it's just like automated execution of contractual information that you nowadays have on paper, which can be automated and coded in smart contracts.
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of like there are startups popping up everywhere. My last example I read yesterday for preparations was the online music industry, which could bring like the musician and the fan closely together without any other parties in between, or charities. So SOS Kinderdorf, who is working on concepts like that.
This one is really interesting when you say charity. Actually, today you have no guarantee that the money that you spend to the organization actually arrives at the point of interest, because there's an intermediary in the middle that takes your money and gives it to a certain amount to the party that requires it. Yeah, but by decentralizing this operation and to establish like a direct peer-to-peer connection to people, you're actually able to see and to verify and to guarantee that this transaction takes really place.
What about if we talk about immutable storage and immutable records? Do you think there are industries which can, like a lot of people talking about the healthcare industry, like that we're storing our information, our health information in immutable records. So we're talking now a lot about bringing the different parties closer together without an intermediary, or smart contracts as a part of the interaction between the consumer and the producer. But what about these industries where you have immutable records? Do you see there any benefits and any industries? Really
there are a lot of benefits, but if I just can add to your stuff, the thing is, a lot of people don't know and they don't grasp what you can do with the blockchain. So for a lot of people, they just think, why don't we use a database for that? The thing is, most of the times you have an intermediary that you don't trust. And what you can do, for example, I can bring up some examples, like the land titles in Honduras or something. There's a startup like putting the land titles that you own the land, like the GPS coordinates, the satellite images and stuff. They put it to the blockchain. So even if you trust your central authority, which would be the government in that case, you don't have to trust this government, because the network itself trusts itself, and then you know this is my land, and I can show it because I have the registry and I have the private key to this kind of information. Also, if you're just in examples, another one would be, let's say if you, for example, ticket systems. If you want to go to a sport event and it's sold out, and you find a card in eBay or in front of the stadium by some weird guy who tries to sell you any fake tickets.
Like I typically.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what if just the venue organizer, like the sports organizer, just puts all the information on the blockchain? Like, let's say 200 tickets, each has their unique ID, and the date and what event it is. And at the end, you register on this blockchain and ask the venue organizer to buy one of those tickets, and then it's basically sold. It's transferred to your account, and only you, since you hold your private key, you can verify that this is your ticket. So if there's a fake ticket on the market, first of all, there will be no fake ticket on the market, because if somebody tries to sell you something, he's not able to, because he can't transfer it to your account. So it's just the principle of canceling out intermediaries, of getting trust to a bigger network, and that's where people have to think outside of the box to find opportunities to use the blockchain.
Yeah. No, I think that's really the critical advantages and benefits of this so-called distributed ledger, and I think a lot of industries can benefit from it. The question will be, what if I am the one who actually acts as the intermediary? So
Yes.
what will happen to me? But yeah, I mean, what will happen? So how can you develop new business models based on the blockchain, either as a customer company or an industry, or as maybe also the intermediary? What happens if I'm PayPal?
Yeah.
What happens to me?
Yeah, I think actually to get started with blockchains, it's not necessary to actually develop on blockchain core technology, right? If you want to gain some traction on this topic, or you want to do you want to experiment with it, you actually can code a blockchain in any programming language. Since like the basic principles, as I mentioned in the beginning, are actually very simple. You just have containers with data in it. You encrypt it over a hash, and you connect the hashes to each block, right? And that's it basically, right? So to get started with the blockchain, it actually takes only some brain power and a guy who can code a couple of lines in R or Python or JavaScript or whatever, and then you get familiar with the basic ideas of the blockchain. One thing you mentioned with what happens if I'm the intermediary is a very good question, because I think that due to this distributed technology and actually that intermediaries are not longer necessary, intermediaries themselves have to be providers of blockchain technology in the future. Yeah? Let's think of PayPal, for example, right? Amazon or whatever. I think those companies will, in the near future, heavily invest in this topic, because otherwise, as you mentioned, they will have a problem in the future.
What should Zalando do in the future, right? They are bringing different parties together, right? So they have to at least.
I mean, with if you mention Zalando, it's like, I think it's a bit different, because actually I want to have goods from Zalando, right? But they are like distributing different brands and different, trousers and shoes and whatever. In order to do the same thing that Zalando does, I would have to get into contractual relation to every fashion label around the world. Which
this means we still will have, we will have platforms in the future.
I think so, but those platforms will be decentralized, and I think of Amazon, Zalando, or whatever will have to be providers of such technology in order to offer the same services they do as of today.
So, how would you then start? I mean, you told us you can do it actually with any programming language. Now we have different types of people talking about different kinds of blockchains. Thomas, how would you start? Like, for example, Ethereum. So, as an example.
Okay, so there are many ways to start, or there are many ways that actually right now support smart contracts. And I think it's an important thing when you start doing blockchain stuff that it already supports smart contracts, because that's where it becomes really interesting. Okay, Ethereum is a good option. There's also Hyperledger supporting like smart contracts. They have different like consensus algorithms. That is one other thing to keep in mind. You don't always need proof of work. You can get away without like hashing and wasting energy by practical Byzantine fault tolerance, for example, which is an algorithm for keeping track of the consensus. But back to your question, for Ethereum, there are many tools actually where you can start developing smart contracts. Truffle, for example, is a tool for doing this. The language itself, which is used to develop smart contracts, is quite similar to JavaScript. It has a JavaScript-like syntax. It's called Solidity. And basically, developing smart contracts is possible for anybody who has like a slight, experience with programming languages and object-oriented programming, for example, to define a class. Like the class is the smart contract, and you define some interfaces, how you get the info into the blockchain, how you retrieve it, and the logic, what happens, and so on. So I would advise anybody who wants to start with this to look up some simple blockchain related examples and to build a small demo application, because you will really get the feeling for this distributed way of thinking if you start out in a small way and you combine some easy tasks, for example, like a distributed chat platform that you could build locally. But basically, this is possible in 300 lines of Python code, or Solidity and so on. This is like quite easy, and you get the concepts, and then you can monitor your network basically and expand to much more interesting and usable tasks.
But how do you approach as a company? I mean, now of course, if I want to learn it by myself, I sit down, I do it as usual. When I want to learn a new programming language, I sit down, I look for small snippets, I look for small examples, I try some small stuff out, I implement it maybe the first time in any programming language. But how do I approach if I want to say, okay, I want to create a new business model, I want to create a new use case, so whatever. How would you guys approach? How would you start, Thomas?
Okay, so the first thing is, since this is a topic which is quite up to date and quite interesting, there will always be people who have personal interest in the blockchain thing. I would like find a few people in the company who have already like personal interest in this, and ask them to get familiar with this and give them some goal where they can develop a demo application for to present like this goal. And the demo application, or the goal needs to be defined in some business relevant way. So
we also need a use case.
Exactly, that's the important thing. And a use case which is not that difficult, like for example transaction handling or analysis of transactions. I'm sorry, this is like a bit off topic, but this is another point where blockchains are quite usable, because all the information that is transacted is stored within one data source. And since we're here in a data science or big data event, basically this is also very convenient, because you have all transactions and data streams within one ledger, basically one data source. Okay, but back to the question. You need a strong use case for some in-house application at best, because then you get the data and have the people that you can contact and so on. So it starts out small.
And I think that's a really important point, because a lot of people say, typically this happens with new technologies, right? People saying, there's a new technology and let's try to use the new technology to shoot on anything you can think of. So it was the same thing with neural networks. So people always started, you have the same situations in your companies that people are calling you and say, hey, I heard about neural networks, let's do anything with the neural network. Hauptsache is a neural network. So
definitely,
this is the same. I think that's the same could happen or will happen or is happening at the moment with the blockchain somehow.
I mean, just having just a situation that you have a hammer doesn't mean you have to put nails in everything around you, right? So, and this is the same thing with the blockchain. You have to, and it's the same thing with also data science and machine learning cases. You have to think about what makes sense, and then you need like a structured approach to get your use cases going, actually. And in the beginning of machine learning and data science a couple of years ago, there were also guys who coded the first customer churn algorithm on their laptop, and basically that's the same thing for the blockchain right now. The topic is very hot, it's very young. You have only like let's say a few trustworthy platforms or architectures that you can develop your smart contracts on. So there has to be some hacking at the end of the day. As the technology itself gets more mature, there will be vendors going on who have more professionalized products in this area. But you need, of course, at some point a structured approach. But in the early stages of the development, if you have a smart guy in your company and he is able to develop the first application, and you have to start somehow.
Yeah. So now we talked a lot about the advantages, the possibilities, the use cases or business models or industries that can use the blockchain, but maybe we should also look on the other side of the coin and talk about a little bit about the challenges. And it is an uprising in new technology coming up. It is a hot topic. It happens a lot of hacking at the moment. So what from your experience, or what do you think, what are the biggest challenges in using the blockchain technology for companies or even for all of us in the room? Marco?
So basically, I don't think the implementation itself is the biggest challenge. It's, as you said, although there's people you find in the companies which are interested in the topic, it's still, you need at least some decent programmers to start. That's one of the main challenges I see. And if you want a really, really good developer, you have to pay a lot of money because they earn a lot. But other than that, the problem I see, if I look on top on the industry space, is that every company tries to develop its own blockchain, and which is basically not, it's completely against the network effect, because what they should try to do is gather their resources and make one bigger chain instead of everybody like making a small chain, because it fails to harness the network effects, and also like the security and regulations issues. I don't know if anybody thought about, like, when we get rid of banks, like how would we, what would be, and nobody can tell us how it will be when we get rid of banks, and we have to trust decentralized networks, because there's reasons why there are regulations for companies, so to say.
This is like a more meta discussion or ethical discussion, because when you think about like the society itself, it is built on trust, right? Yeah. Everything in our country is built on the trust that, for example, 10 euros today is worth 10 euros tomorrow, or that the government today is the same government as tomorrow. And if those barriers are coming down, I think this is something you really have to think about if you want this, right? Because for example, one example that I always cite when I talk about this is, let's say you have a blackout in a city, yeah? Only one night of blackout in the city makes people going bananas, right? they rob stuff, they destroy stuff, because just of the single event, right? And those are like minor things that can happen sometime. But when you see the breaking away of central institutions of trust within a society, I think you running into very more fundamental problems. And this is something you have to think about, and this is something that's actually going on because, like in the terms of regulation of blockchain or cryptocurrencies that are based on blockchain technologies and stuff, because trust has to be there somehow. Yeah? And if you really want to go into the direction of decentralization and blockchain technology, you have to make sure that people really trust this technology, because otherwise, yeah.
I mean, another point we should at least have discussed a couple of sentences about it is what about the whole ecological point? I mean, we're discussing a lot of the technology and the power behind the technology. Now there are quotes out there saying that the usage of the Bitcoin blockchain is approximately the electricity usage of Denmark in total. So any comments on that about the challenges? So how can we address this, Thomas?
Okay, so the way I see it, right now the main power consumption comes from the consensus algorithm that is used, which is proof of work basically, which ensures people are hashing and computing hash sums. You cannot predict who is finding the next hash to keep the network secure and so on. But there are other consensus algorithms that can be used, which are, well, depending on the use case, appropriate or not. For example, the Byzantine fault tolerance thing, which doesn't require any hashing, but it doesn't scale very well. So the thing is, it has like the transaction or the communication needed for Byzantine fault tolerance, they have quadratic complexity, meaning if you do this for the whole world, it doesn't work. Your network will be congested just because of the consensus algorithm. But for in-company blockchains, for example, which don't have that many nodes, this might be a way to go actually. So you're not wasting any power if you have an in-company blockchain, for example. Or there's proof of stake, or there's other things like the Byzantine fault tolerance with a selected few of all the nodes, like other blockchains are doing this. So I think there's a lot of research going into this, and using cryptography, well, I'm pretty sure we already have found solutions to this, but there will be more interesting and efficient.
So there are already options out there
Yes.
addressing this subject. I mean, this is, I think, one of the greatest challenges at the moment, really, this or evil out there is saying that the power consumption at the moment caused by blockchains and especially Bitcoins, yeah.
Just one comment to this. So this is also like a philosophical thing, but this is also an interesting incentive because technology companies providing the hashing power, they are becoming faster and faster, which maybe enables us, like the development for doing this, the incentive, maybe enables us in the future to do other quick computations, for example. Yeah. Maybe during this development, we come up with extremely fast computer chips for solving other important things, like, medicine or image processing, whatever.
So yeah, I think we're still just in the beginning of this development, research, and technologies. So for that moment, thank you very much from my side. Now into the audience. Now we have the experts here. Any questions to the blockchain experts? Anything you always wanted to know, to ask? We have a microphone here.
Don't be shy.
We have to talk about that later.
Okay, no comments about investments?
I make the start. So as we have 3 different experts here, 4 basically, Nadim, which kind of industries would you say are right now jumping into the approaching train or the driving train of blockchain? Like, is it like more, let's say, old-fashioned, in my case, the automotive industry with a huge historical background that need to change? Or is it like, I don't know, web platforms like Zalando, like, I don't know, which kind of industries do you think are currently, do you see in your daily business applying those things?
Yeah, I make the first answer. Since I'm from Frankfurt, I know that there are like massive investments into the technology in the finance and banking field, because what's really good about finance and banking is that they have a completely digital business model since, I don't know, 500 years or something, since the invention of the computer itself, right? Because actually, like, money itself is just a virtual product, and it is data to some extent, just data. And of course, since banks are very, very prone to this topic of decentralization and trust and so on, there are very big initiatives there to foster, to explore, and to develop blockchain applications in the banking field. And I think the same holds for every company that has a very, very digital business model or a very digital product, which is in contrary to the automotive industry. Historically, I mean, automotive is changing, services are coming, data-based services are coming, but I think one of those industries which can be really fast in adopting the technology and implementing first features or products are companies that have a data-driven or data-based business model.
So if I may add to this one, so also automotive, we have financial services. So, and I know that they are discussing a first, let's say, pilot, a first product in blockchain. What would you recommend to those managers that will decide such kind of investments? Which could be an appropriate first little product? So what is a minimal viable product with respect to blockchain?
Was this a question to me or?
So there's several approaches in terms of financial, like money lending, and basically there's one startup, I think it's from the US. They basically try to move lending money to the blockchain. Let's go 5 years ahead and think you get your salary by any digital currency. It doesn't have to be Bitcoin, whatever. So if you lend money from a third party, you could actually move that with a smart contract to the blockchain. Whenever you receive salary, the smart contract automatically triggers, and you pay back, let's say, 2% of your salary to your lending. That's something you can adapt for whole worldwide. That's what they're trying to do actually right now. So that's maybe use case like lending money, especially for, it doesn't have to be for the automotive industry, but it's just a global use case. But I'll add another one. I don't know if you heard about the company Xane. They worked with Porsche together. What they did, they used the blockchain for keyless entries into cars. So they basically made it secure and super fast to just use your smartphone and open the car. And what you can do then on top of that is you can, I think Amazon did it as well right now, you can give permissions for anybody for a short period of time to open your car. So if you have like a delivery guy and he wants to get an Amazon package into your car, you just give it a 5-minute permission so you can open the car, put it in your trunk, and then.
Yeah, and I think Porsche did it only for the trunk, and it was
exactly
super successful in the MVP. And I think the whole private transport area and ride-sharing industry, the whole developments, all these startups, a use case could be that you're renting private cars through the blockchain by sharing just a key to the person you want to share your car with. So imagine we could disrupt Uber somehow, we could disrupt any other big car sharing, car riding companies by sharing private cars, and you have a smart contract for insurances.
Yeah. Oh, I think what's another thing that's really interesting is like to combine let's call it virtual and real entities. You mentioned it before in the blockchain, in the ride sharing example. For example, when you say of financial services in the car industry, I mean, you're not limited to only store contractual information into the blockchain, right? For example, one use case in your situation could be which is a bit mean, but anyway, you're lending somebody money to, or you're financing a car or something, right? And this person at some point does not pay the rates.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then this information could be stored into a smart contract and disables the usage of the car, for example, completely automated without any people or any person interfering in this process. Yeah. So everything that you think can be programmed or computed is a possible use case.
There's maybe let me add one thing to this. So when you're assembling, for example, the parts, so the parts, they are maybe signed by the manufacturer who did the parts. So this is also one option to ensure that the parts have not been tampered with, that they have not been changed, that you're not including like parts from different manufacturers, so you can actually track the parts. But also if you, for example, consider cars as IoT devices, basically you have the swarm of IoT devices which can communicate with a blockchain, for example, exchanging maybe sensor data, but also like combining this with machine learning techniques. As you mentioned, like cars today are like huge computers and computing devices. They're recognizing people, they're recognizing signs on the streets and so on, and all this data basically can also be exchanged and shared between the cars, but also in the process using the blockchain, making sure it's like not nobody's infiltrating stuff, nobody's messing with your blockchain and your history and the data that you have. Basically, like this swarm of cars, syncing them and keeping them all on the same page is basically also like a use case for this consensus part in the blockchain. Like everybody has the same reality.
Further questions? Can we help out? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm from let's say one of the oldest startups, so Generali, so from insurance. So basically, my question would be, because currently we are in discussions also with our, let's say, business teams, how to employ blockchain for smart contracts, and we are thinking about how to get the underwriting process also in the blockchain, so that if you are, let's say, in this ski area and you want to go down the mountain, so I want to make my policy active. So this is, let's say, one of the biggest challenge, and also referring to all the data protection topics and so on. So maybe what's your opinion on that?
So that you have like you get right, like location-based insurance.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a smart idea. The thing, what's cool about those kinds of ideas is that from the underwriting perspective, you're able to be more competitive at your pricing. Because, for example, if I go to you and I say I want to have a specific insurance that only covers when I'm going downhill on my skis, but only with 50 miles an hour or more or something. Those are use cases that are from the risk calculation perspective actually very, very difficult to price. And but why? Because when you're pricing insurance, you need data. Right, and by being able to build very customized insurance products, you're also able to gather internally a lot of or more detailed data that you may have as of today. So I think this idea is I think it's interesting, but as you mentioned it before, since you're working with personal data of people. You have to be very careful about where to store. Also, I mean, in your internal blockchain, you have to be very careful about who can see data. But I think there are ways of coping with this, because you have different types of blockchains where something is maybe more open or more closed. And I think it's a great example.
Yeah, but I think it's also a good use case to really challenge, without knowing any details, if the blockchain is really necessary to solve that problem. If this really is like the benefits, the advantages we discussed of the blockchain, is the blockchain here the necessary technology to solve this problem? Because what I see is machine learning, yes. So we want to maybe calculate or evaluate how many questions he has to answer before you can offer the policy. Do we need a distributed system? Probably yes. We need computational power. We're location based, but I would now, from what I when I'm thinking of this use case at the moment, the challenge would be to discuss: is the blockchain the necessary technology? And I'm not sure yet, or I don't know if what benefits you accept from the blockchain. I mean, maybe the security of the records, or the
just to have the security that your contract is let's say you have the policy
or the smart
and
contract
you have
point. Okay.
From that perspective, we are thinking that this is the right way. But of course, you're right. You can do that with the usual databases, and I think the performances with usual databases is also okay.
Yeah, but I think like when you go in this direction, you can do very, very, very customized insurance products. Right. For example, this is maybe a bit of a special example. But for example, when I take another one, I'm going with my car, and I only want to cover the risk that I have an accident when I go by more than 100 miles an hour, for example. This is something that is very, very difficult to prove if you really have an accident. But by including smart contracts into this financial product, you're actually the information that the contract executed because I drove like 180 miles an hour or something. This information is stored in the blockchain itself, and you can later really recall what was going on. If the driver was going faster or slower than the negotiated execution value or something, and you can really think. My brain is really popping right now. You can think of like many of those use cases where you have triggers that go at certain points, at certain conditions, and then only when those triggers execute, you're insured. Yeah, and this is something you can, as a customer, define with your insurance.
Agree. I will buy. So you find Statworx down
later.
outside in the hall. Any further questions? Yeah. We ran out of time. Okay, so far. From that point of view, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I hope you enjoyed the panel, the questions, and the only thing I can say, what's left to say, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your time, and thank you very much to you.